Imagine you and three of your closest friends vanish in the vast wilderness of Yosemite National Park. Not just lost for a few hours, but gone completely. For 7 long years. No phone calls, no footprints, no sign of where you went. And then, one day, you are finally found. Not on a crowded hiking trail, but deep in the forest, in a desolate place few would dare to enter. 3 skeletons sitting quietly together, as if waiting for something, in the cold silence of the dark. This is not a legend, nor a campfire tale passed down over time. This is real, the story of 3 college students, young and full of life, who simply wanted a short trip to explore Yosemite back in 2012. They carried backpacks, dreams, and excitement, but their journey became one with no way back. And when the truth finally emerged 7 years later, it shook everyone who heard it. Because their deaths were not just a tragedy, they left behind a haunting question that has never truly been answered. What really happened in the shadows of Yosemite? Where beauty and wilderness sometimes conceal the darkest of secrets, their story begins with 3 friends, Daniel Harper, Michael Reyes, and Emily Carter. All in their early 20s, they were college students from Northern California who shared a love for the outdoors. Though their personalities were different, together they formed a bond that seemed unshakable. Daniel was the adventurous one, tall, athletic, always looking for the next thrill. To him, Yosemite was not just a national park, it was a challenge waiting to be conquered. He was the kind of person who believed that life was too short to stay in comfort zones, and this trip was his idea. Michael, on the other hand, carried his camera everywhere. Photography wasn't just a hobby. It was how he made sense of the world. Quiet and thoughtful, he saw beauty where others overlooked it. The curve of a fallen branch, the way light touched a rock wall at dusk. He wanted to capture Yosemite not as a postcard, but as a story told through his lens. Then there was Emily, calm, steady, the kind of person who balanced out her 2 friends' impulses. She wasn't as daring as Daniel, nor as lost in her own world as Michael. She was careful, often the voice of reason, but she loved the serenity of nature. To her, Yosemite promised a retreat from the noise of city life and the chaos of deadlines and lectures. The 3 friends had been planning their short summer trip for weeks. It wasn't meant to be anything extraordinary, just a chance to step away from classrooms and routines, to breathe fresh mountain air, to camp beneath stars that city lights could never show. They packed lightly, tents, food, Michael's beloved camera, and journals where they sometimes scribbled their thoughts. Yosemite itself seemed the perfect destination. Millions of visitors came every year to marvel at its granite giants like El Capitan and Half Dome, to stand in awe before waterfalls that thundered down cliffs. But Yosemite also had a darker reputation. For decades, people had vanished within its vast wilderness. Some were found days or weeks later, injured but alive. Others were never seen again. Daniel laughed off those stories when they were told. People get lost because they're careless, he would say. Michael wasn't so sure, though. He had read articles about hikers who disappeared just yards from popular trails. Emily listened quietly, choosing not to add to the tension. Still, their excitement outweighed any hesitation. To them, Yosemite was not a place of danger, but of freedom. They were young, together, and confident nothing could truly go wrong. It was early June 2012 when they finally set out. None of them could have known that Yosemite, a place of breathtaking beauty and unforgiving wilderness, was about to write the final chapter of their lives. It was the morning of the 14th of June 2012. The sky above Yosemite was a clear, endless blue, the kind that seemed to promise nothing but safety. Daniel, Michael, and Emily drove into the park in Daniel's old silver Honda, windows rolled down, music spilling out as laughter filled the air. They had been awake since dawn, fueled by coffee, excitement, and the thought of escaping into the wilderness. Their plan was simple: set up a base camp near the quieter side of the park, then hike into one of the less traveled valleys for 2 nights before heading back. Daniel insisted on the challenge, wanting to explore beyond the crowded tourist trails. Michael was thrilled at the chance to photograph landscapes few had ever seen. Emily, cautious as always, had studied maps, marked their intended route, and promised to call her mother that evening to let her know they were safe. By midday, they parked the Honda in a designated lot. The car would later become the first silent clue, waiting for years, untouched by time except for layers of dust and pine needles. Inside the trunk lay extra food, blankets, and a first aid kit, all left behind, as if they had expected to be back quickly. They hiked for hours, backpack strapped tight, shoes crunching against dry earth. Along the way, other hikers saw them, a group of 3, young and energetic, walking with confidence, deeper into the forest. Witnesses would later tell investigators that the trio didn't seem lost or worried. They looked like any other adventurers chasing an afternoon of beauty. When the sun began to lower, they reached a secluded clearing where they pitched their tents. Michael pulled out his camera, snapping photos of Emily laughing as Daniel tried and failed to hammer a tent stake into rocky soil. The air was cooling, scented with pine and damp earth. Somewhere in the distance, water trickled, perhaps from a stream that wound its way through the valley. That evening, Emily kept her promise and called her mother. The call was short, reception was poor, her voice cutting in and out, but she reassured her family that they had arrived safely, that everything was fine. It was the last time anyone ever heard from her. The night grew darker, the forest alive with its own hidden language. The rustle of unseen animals, the far-off crack of branches, the low sigh of wind weaving through trees. Around their small fire, the 3 friends talked about school, future plans, and places they still wanted to see together. Michael carefully placed his camera inside his bag, promising himself to capture sunrise shots in the morning. Daniel stretched out on the ground, staring at the stars through breaks in the canopy, pointing out constellations. Emily, tired but content, wrote a short note in her journal before tucking it back into her pack. By dawn, they were already on the move again. Witnesses recalled glimpsing them heading even deeper into the woods, following a trail that wasn't marked on most tourist maps. Some said they looked determined, almost purposeful. Others remembered how quickly they disappeared from view, swallowed by trees. And then, nothing. No one saw them again. No more phone calls, no footprints, no trace of 3 young lives carried into the heart of Yosemite. Their path simply ended where the wilderness began. When Emily's family didn't hear back from her the following evening, they grew uneasy. At first, they told themselves it was nothing unusual. Cell service in Yosemite was notoriously unreliable. But when the hours stretched into a full day with no word, unease hardened into fear. Calls went unanswered. Texts were never read. By the 3rd day, Daniel's parents and Michael's older brother joined Emily's family in contacting park rangers. What began as worry soon escalated into a full-scale search. Authorities moved quickly. Rangers located Daniel's silver Honda still parked neatly in the lot where the 3 had left it. The sight was chilling. The car was undisturbed, the doors locked, the trunk still packed with extra supplies. Their return had clearly been expected, but now, the car was return-stayed. Vehicle sat silently beneath a layer of dust and pine pollen, as if waiting for its owners to come back. Search and rescue teams were deployed into the wilderness. Helicopters circled above, their blades chopping through the stillness as spotters scanned miles of dense canopy below. Teams of volunteers, rangers, and deputies swept through the woods on foot, calling out names that were swallowed by the vast silence. Specially trained dogs were brought in, noses pressed to the ground, weaving through brush and boulders in hopes of catching a trace of human scent. Yet Yosemite was a labyrinth, covering over 750,000 acres of jagged peaks, cliffs, rivers, and forests. The park was both breathtaking and merciless. For every marked trail, there were countless unmarked paths twisting into the unknown. Days turned into weeks as searchers scoured valleys, climbed ridges, and scanned riverbanks for discarded gear or signs of struggle. Nothing appeared. No tents, no torn clothing, not even the glimmer of Michael's camera lens in the dirt. The summer sun was unforgiving. Heat in the daytime dried riverbeds and shriveled plants, while nights dropped sharply cold. If the 3 students were lost, survival would have been a brutal challenge. Rangers followed logical routes toward water sources, along animal paths, into canyons, but found no evidence they had passed that way. Even thermal imaging from helicopters revealed only empty wilderness. Family members remained close by throughout. They camped near ranger stations, holding on to hope that at any moment someone would radio in good news. Emily's mother spoke softly to reporters, saying she believed her daughter was resourceful and careful, that perhaps the three were sheltering somewhere waiting to be found. Daniel's father walked the trails himself, refusing to accept that his son could vanish so easily. Michael's brother clutched one of his photographs, a snapshot of Yosemite taken years before, as if it might somehow lead them back. But as days dragged into weeks, hope began to thin. Rangers admitted quietly to families that Yosemite had swallowed people before, that sometimes no matter how thorough the search, the forest gave back nothing. Statistics were sobering. Dozens had vanished over decades, some found years later, others never at all. By late July, nearly 6 weeks after the trio first entered the park, the official search effort was scaled back. Volunteers returned home. Helicopters no longer hovered. The dogs were sent back to their kennels. The vast silence of Yosemite closed in once more, unbroken, indifferent. The families never stopped asking questions. They wondered why no belongings had been found. Why not a backpack, a water bottle, or even a scrap of fabric caught on a branch? The complete absence of clues was what haunted them most. It was as though Daniel, Michael, and Emily had been plucked out of existence, erased from the trails entirely. By the end of summer, the disappearance of the 3 students was filed among Yosemite's unsolved cases, another mystery in a park already heavy with them. For the families, it was not closure, only a wound left open. For the rangers, it was a reminder that in Yosemite, even the most determined search could fail against the enormity of wilderness. And so the park returned to its rhythms, waterfalls roaring, forests whispering, tourists arriving by the millions. But somewhere deep inside, beneath its beauty, Yosemite kept its secret. 3 young lives had vanished within its borders, and no one could say why or how. The official search had ended, but for the families of Daniel, Michael, and Emily, life entered a strange, endless twilight. Days no longer felt like days only waiting. Waiting for a phone call, a sighting, a miracle, anything. At first, the media kept their story alive. News crews set up outside Yosemite's ranger stations, and headlines asked the same chilling question: how do 3 college students vanish without a trace in one of America's busiest national parks? For weeks, their faces appeared on television screens, and missing posters stapled to bulletin boards at trailheads. Strangers joined online forums, speculating endlessly. Some believed the students had fallen victim to the elements lost in the maze of granite and pine, overcome by hunger or cold. Others whispered darker theories: an attack by a wild animal, a hidden criminal presence in the woods, or something even more sinister that no one could name. But time has a way of erasing even the sharpest fears. As seasons passed, the media moved on to new stories. The posters faded in sunlight, edges curling, until rangers quietly removed them. For Yosemite, the mystery became another entry on a long list of disappearances the park had never explained. The families, however, never let go. Every holiday felt incomplete. Every birthday passed with an empty chair. Emily's mother left her daughter's room exactly as it had been. Clothes folded neatly, books stacked on the desk, as though Emily might walk through the door at any moment. Daniel's father drove to Yosemite each summer, hiking trails alone, scanning the trees for anything overlooked. Michael's brother kept developing old rolls of film, hoping to find a forgotten frame that might offer a clue. Rumors never fully stopped. Hikers occasionally claimed they'd seen 3 figures in the distance, or found footprints that seemed out of place. None of these reports ever led to answers. They only deepened the ache of uncertainty. 7 years is a long time to live with silence, long enough for hope to erode, yet not long enough to accept death. By 2019, the case was rarely spoken of outside the families. For most people, it had become a forgotten story, buried under the weight of time. And then, the silence finally broke. It was late August of 2019 when the silence finally shattered. A group of campers, 5 friends in their 30s, had ventured deeper into Yosemite than most dared to go. They weren't inexperienced, seasoned hikers who prided themselves on finding hidden corners of the wilderness. That weekend, however, their path led them somewhere unexpected. On the second evening of their trip, they strayed from a narrow trail, following a stream that cut jaggedly through rock. The terrain grew harsher, darker, as if even the forest itself wanted to keep them out. Just as the sun began to sink, one of the hikers spotted an opening in the rock wall, a shallow cave, half concealed by brush and fallen branches. Curiosity tugged at them. They shone their flashlights inside. At first, all they saw was the rough stone of the cave walls and a scattering of old debris. But as the beam swept deeper, the light fell upon something that made the group fall silent. 3 figures sat together against the far wall, not bodies, not in the way one would imagine, but skeletons, their bones pale and brittle with time, arranged as though the 3 had once leaned back to rest. Their skulls tilted slightly toward each other, their empty sockets staring into nothing. It looked almost deliberate, as though they had been waiting for something, side by side, in the dark. The campers stumbled back in shock, their voices trembling as they whispered to each other. Alongside the skeletal remains lay fragments of what once had been life: collapsed tents, their fabric rotted and torn, metal camping gear corroded with rust, a few notebooks swollen from years of dampness. And, most haunting of all, a camera with its casing cracked, the lens clouded with dust. Nearby, empty water bottles and food wrappers lay scattered, untouched for years. One of the campers pulled out a phone, their hands shaking as they dialed 911. Within hours, park rangers and law enforcement arrived, sealing off the area. Photographs were taken, the remains carefully examined. It didn't take long for investigators to make a chilling confirmation. Dental records and belongings proved beyond doubt that these were the remains of Daniel Harper, Michael Reyes, and Emily Carter, the 3 students who had vanished without a trace in 2012. The news spread quickly. Families who had lived for years in limbo were suddenly forced to confront the finality of death. Emily's mother collapsed when told, clutching her daughter's necklace that she had kept close all those years. Michael's brother stared in disbelief, whispering, "So all this time, they were here." Daniel's father, who had searched the park each summer, sat silently, his face carved with grief and exhaustion. Reporters descended upon Yosemite once more, this time not with speculation, but with a chilling headline: 3 missing students found dead after 7 years. The public reacted with shock and sorrow, but also with questions. Why there? How had they survived in that cave, even for a short while? And why had no one discovered them sooner, despite years of searching? The scene itself offered hints, but no definitive answers. The notebooks were too damaged to read, pages fused together by moisture. The camera's memory card was corroded beyond recovery. All that remained was the haunting image: 3 friends, side by side, swallowed by time and silence, deep within Yosemite's unforgiving wilderness. Investigators pieced together what little evidence the cave offered, but the truth remained frustratingly out of reach. The most accepted theory was that the 3 students had lost their way after venturing too far from marked trails. Disoriented and exhausted, they may have stumbled upon the cave and chosen it as a temporary shelter, believing they would soon find their way back. The remnants of tents and food wrappers suggested they had survived for some time, days, perhaps even weeks. But in Yosemite, survival is a race against the elements. Nights drop below freezing even in summer, streams run dry without warning, and the forest offers little mercy to those unprepared for prolonged isolation. Dehydration, exposure, and starvation could easily have claimed them one by one, until only silence remained. Yet certain details fueled speculation. Why hadn't they tried to leave clearer signals for rescuers, markings on trees, fires built in open spaces, clothing hung high to catch the eye of helicopters? Had they grown too weak, or had something else kept them there, a reason we may never know? Some whispered of darker possibilities. The careful way their remains were found seated together, almost arranged, struck many as unnatural. Were they comforting each other in their final hours, or had some unseen force shaped their fate? Without journals or photographs to speak for them, those questions hung in the air, unanswered. In the end, Yosemite gave back only bones and fragments, not explanations. The forest had held them in silence for 7 years, and even in discovery, it refused to reveal the full story of what had happened in its shadows. In the end, the story of Daniel, Michael, and Emily closes not with answers, but with echoes. Their remains were carried out of Yosemite with quiet reverence, escorted past the very trails they had once walked full of laughter and life. Families laid them to rest at last, but the peace was incomplete. Closure never truly comes when the how and why remain obscured. For visitors, the discovery became another reminder of Yosemite's dual nature, a place of breathtaking beauty, but also of unforgiving silence. Thousands of hikers continue to walk its trails each year, marveling at Half Dome or Yosemite Falls, yet somewhere in the back of their minds, they remember that 3 young students once vanished here, swallowed whole by the forest. The image lingers, 3 friends sitting side by side, deep in a hidden cave, as though frozen in time. Were they waiting for rescue? Were they comforting one another in their final breaths? Or had nature itself demanded their silence, as it has with so many before them? Perhaps that is the most haunting truth. Yosemite does not always give back its secrets. It takes, and it keeps, and when it finally does return what was lost, the answers come fractured and incomplete. Daniel Harper, Michael Reyes, and Emily Carter remain part of Yosemite now, not just in the soil and stone, but in the uneasy quiet that settles when night falls over the forest. Their story reminds us that some disappearances are not meant to be solved, only remembered. Because sometimes it is not the vastness of the wilderness that swallows people whole, but the mysteries it has never intended to reveal. If stories like this leave you thinking long after the video ends, then I invite you to stay with us here on Last Seen. This channel is where we bring to light the mysteries of those who vanished, their journeys, their silence, and the questions that remain. Every week, we uncover another story the world should not forget. So if you haven't already, consider subscribing, leaving your thoughts or theories in the comments, and sharing this video with someone who also wonders what truly hides in the shadows. Because here on Last Seen, every disappearance has a story, and every story deserves to be told.